Fun Facts with CDS Education Consulting. I'm your host, Kiara Deltito-Sharrott, and today we're going to be playing a fun game of charter school, fact or fiction. There are all sorts of myths and misconceptions about charter public schools, and so today I ask you to join me in playing a game of fact or fiction so we can get to the bottom of some of the popular myths that are out there and some of the areas wwhere what you've heard is true. The first fact or fiction statement that I would like you to think about is charter schools are an educational model. It turns out that this is fiction. Charter schools are not an educational or pedagogical model. What I mean by that is what is taught in all charter schools and the way that charter schools teach are not universally the same. Charter schools are instead a governance model, and this means that the thing that unites them together, instead of being their educational programming, are the ways that they are run. For example, they all have a nonprofit board. They all have a responsibility to an authorizer who holds them accountable to enacting the mission that they said that they would, and has some pretty serious strings that they can pull if charters are unable to do so. The second statement, which I would like you to think about, is this one: fact or fiction. Charter schools put economic stress on traditional public schools and teaching unions. The answer to this question is fact. As a function of the way that charter schools are funded in most states, there are some tensions that arise between charter public schools and traditional public schools. This is because in many cases, at least a portion of the way that funds funnel from state government to charter public schools has to do with the individual student that chooses to attend the school. So, in many cases, a portion of the funding for that student will be taken from what would have gone to the district and be given to the charter school instead in order to provide educational services to that child. This is because traditional public schools have costs related to overhead which exceeds the amount that an individual student brings into the school for their own education. For example, this is things like facilities, upkeep at a large scale, paying district level staff member salaries, and the biggest one being paying into the teacher pension, which supports teachers after they've retired. Teachers, when they choose to go to a charter school, most of the time are leaving the union that they would have been in a traditional public district. This isn't universally true, and there are some models across the country and here in Rhode Island where charter public school teachers are still unionized, but the vast majority of charter school teachers are no longer unionized when they're teaching at a charter school, and that means not only do the ways that they operate look a little bit different, but they're no longer paying those dues into the system of the union, and so that puts pressure on the union in terms of their operations. The next statement that I'd like you to think about is fact or fiction: charter schools are private schools. The next note that charter schools are public schools. Now, what does that mean? Essentially, there are two pieces of that that are so important. One, they're funded by the public, and two, they're accountable to the public. And so they have all of the same baseline laws and regulations. And while there might be some flexibilities, there are no flexibilities around civil rights and related issues that our public entities protect. From this, if more students apply to a charter school than there are seats available, a lottery must be the tool that's used in order to select which students come to a school. The only exception to this is at times where there are weights given to enrollment based on specific factors, like some schools might take in more students experiencing homelessness or more students that come from a particular city or town. But in general, the lottery is the main decider of who gets into a public charter school. Now, there are tensions here with that as well, of course, because there are always going to be variations in who has access to information around options for education, and therefore who applies to attend charter public schools. So sometimes people say, well, if it's really a lottery and our schools are really following through with that law and expectation, how come we sometimes see variations between the types of students that attend traditional public schools and the types of students that attend charter schools? And the answer really is that until we can find a system for making sure that there's equal access to those applications and equal applications being put in some areas, there will be families that have more access to those pieces that are elevating to put their students into the charter public system. And therefore, you may have, on average, parents that are more engaged or students that have a family with more resources to think about their education. Next fact or fiction statement, which I would like you to think about, is that charter schools have been around forever. In fact, they're older than me. The reality is this simply is fiction. Charter schools are still a relatively new model when we think about the educational history of our country. The first charter was authorized in 1992 in Minnesota. So I, in fact, am older than all charter schools that exist across the country. The next fact or fiction question, which I would like you to think about, is that charter school leaders are not reflective of the student bodies that they serve. This is fiction. However, of all of the questions and statements that I've put forward for you today, this one is the trickiest to answer, because although on average charter school leaders are more likely to be people of color, women, and younger than the leaders in many traditional public schools, there is still a big gap that exists between who is currently in our educator workforce and who we would like to see long term. And so, whether you say this is fact or whether you say this is fiction might be a little bit gray because there's significant work to be done there. The final fact or fiction statement that I would like you to think about is charter schools are allowed in all 50 states across the country. Now, this one might surprise you, but this is fiction. There are actually 8 states across the country who still do not have laws on the books around charter schools or explicitly prohibit charter school models. There's still great variation across states in terms of who can operate a charter, whether or not charter schools are allowable to begin with, whether teachers are unionized, how schools are funded, what educational programs are allowable, what variation from the traditional system is allowable, etc. So if there's anything at all that I want you to take away from this video today, it's that charter schools are not a one-size-fits-all model. If you are a charter leader, a parent making decisions about schooling, or someone who cares about education, I encourage you to share this video. It's important before we place critiques on any model that we understand the variations that truly do exist within the model and the structures that create the model itself. I am all for being critical and making sure that we are putting equitable outcomes at the fore of everything that we're doing. But the first step towards that equity is taking a step back and truly understanding what's fact and what's fiction.